So, today I decided to do a slightly different sort of video. I guess all of my videos have been quite different, apart from the two tutorial videos, but a while back I posted a thread on speed solving, 1st of January 2016, about cubing generations and how people would view them. And it turned out to be quite an interesting thread. There were lots of different models proposed. I picked some which I thought were either quite well detailed or raised some interesting points. So, I'm just going to go through each of them, listing off how they categorise each of the eras or generations, or however you'd like to term it, of speed solving, or at least cubing in general. And yeah, I'll put up some graphics on the screen just so you can get a better idea of how these are identified. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the ones which focus on one specific aspect, such as hardware, motivation, prominent cubers, who they looked up to, all that sort of stuff. So the first one is Sajwo, and he likes to organise it by prominent cubers. Just as a side note, if I mispronounce any of your usernames, I'm sorry, but some of them are just impossible to pronounce. So, as I said, he likes to organise it by prominent cubers, with the first generation being anything before 2003, anything before the establishment of the World Cubing Association. And the second generation in this case is Eric's generation. So, as I'm sure many of you remember Eric, who dominated quite a few different events for all the way from 2003 to 2009 until the start of that next generation, or Felix's generation as he calls it, from 2010 to 2014. And in a way, you could argue this actually goes all the way to the present day, but he makes a very good point in that in 2014 onwards, they became many more specialised cubers who started to slowly take away all of Felix's records from him. So, people like, I don't know, Samir, who took away his 2x2 and 3x3, well, he's not got the single for quite a while, up until very recently, so you can see his point. And then there are those who like to focus on hardware in this case. Now, NVPENDSEY'S specifically, I thought had quite a nice model, where he splits it into 5 generations, the first one being the Rubik's generation, which, not surprisingly, Rubik's was the only one that you could, well, find. And, well, I suppose you could technically call all of those patent infringement ones, like the original magnetic cubes, where the cubes were held together by magnets. There were a few lawsuits like that, but yeah, Rubik's was the only, well, I wouldn't say good, but the only reasonable one available that worked quite well, and was widely distributed in mass production, all of that. And then, after that, of course, there was the emergence of V-cubes, and there was a very strong negative perception of all the other cubes at this point, where really you either went with V-cubes or you went with Rubik's, and all the others were just, they really were knockoffs, and everyone thought they were terrible. So after that, you get Diane. Now, Diane really started to change that perception, where even though they were really one of the knockoffs, the cubes that they made for everything were much better than Rubik's and V-cubes. It's interesting that Rubik's didn't actually try to accommodate, but then I suppose at this point they dominated a really large market share, and I suppose they still do dominate a really large market share, because non-cubers will still buy Rubik's and still not buy the knockoffs, even though actual cubers know that the so-called knockoffs are better nowadays. Now, Diane dominated everything for quite a while, up until the emergence of Moyu, who, well, really, they made the first 3x3s that were really game-changing. And they dominated 3x3 for a while. He still argues that Diane was better for all of these side events, but Moyu really did upset their cubing share of the market, which was very, very, very high. Which brings us to that 5th generation, the one that we're currently in now, where there are lots and lots of good cubing companies. There's Yushin, Qiyi, still Moyu, still Diane a little bit less now, Moyu a little bit less now, GANs, all of those who create very good 3x3s, where now it's basically down to personal preference, whichever one you want, and all of the side events have started getting good hardware, like the Qiyi Square 1, or the various Yushin big cubes, and all of those things like that. One last model that I'd like to talk about that just bases it on one thing is Mark 49512's model, and he likes to think of it in terms of the motivation. So the 1st generation, again, it just starts with Rubik's, and this was in the 1980s, all the way up till whenever the end of that consumer boom was, where everyone bought cubes, everyone thought they were really cool, everyone tried to solve them, and where their pop culture status was established. But then, after that, you get all of those passionate visionary cubers during the Dark Ages, which is something that we will keep coming back to. The Dark Ages where there wasn't really much consumer boom, there weren't really any competitive aspects like you could have with, say, how do you put this? Like the WCA or the World Championships or anything like that. So they were passionate visionaries, some mathematicians. They just cube for fun, cube to see what they could do. And this is where cubers, as I suppose oddities, I suppose you could call them, really established themselves. And they weren't just everyone wanted to solve cubes now. And then his 3rd generation, anything after the WCA and maybe slightly before, these were the competitive cubers, where lots and lots of cubers came together, started doing competitions, and the WCA was established and became really the officiators, and they don't so much go by Guinness World Records or the Rubik's Company, though recently with the announcement from Erno Rubik that he wants to get involved in competitive cubing, that could signal a change in the 4th. He didn't write that, but I think it would be interesting to see what happens given another 3 years or so. So, yeah, those are all the ones that were based on a single one. So now we go into all of the cubers who propose their models on lots and lots of different criteria. So they're all quite mixed and really quite detailed. So the first one in the thread that I came across that was quite detailed was that one by DGCUBES, and he likes to organise it into 5. Actually, all the ones from here like to organise it into 5 different generations, which seems quite reasonable in my opinion. I mean, well, I sort of proposed 5 as well, so I guess I'm more inclined to agree. So his 1st generation is the 1980s cube craze, and I'm not going to rehash it all. Everyone had cube, everyone liked cubing. And so his 2nd, so this comes up the term again, the cubing Dark Ages, all the way from the end of the consumer boom up until the establishment of the WCA, where there wasn't really much going on, really, in terms of cubers. It was just a few people accessed the internet, so nothing really much happened, which means that we could just go into the 3rd generation, which is the revival generation, from 2003 all the way to about 2008, where online guides became popular, the WCA was established, there were more forums and all of those sort of things. Yeah, hardware was still not very good, so you had to put a lot of modding time in to really get good cubes. And then the 4th was the Diane generation, where you didn't have to put so much effort into modelling all the time. And this lasted from 2009 to 2012, where other events also get better cubes and all of that, such as thanks to Diane, so all the big cubes, all of the weirder cubes, and you didn't have to mod, but modding was still very much a very popular idea to improve all of these cubes. And then final generation, the 5th modern day generation, where there's just an explosion in the number of cubers. So there's the YouTube cubing, and there's more comps, world championships, all of those things, very, very popular. Lots and lots of cubers, or at least greater visibility for cubers. One interesting thing to note is that DGCUBES, for his later generations, is actually very much influenced by the internet and all of those things. So you have the online guides for the 3rd generation. The 4th generation is really where forums started getting used a lot more, and the 5th is YouTube, basically. So, yes, still quite an interesting model. And I'm going to go through 2 more models. These are very, very detailed models. They were proposed a couple of days after, and I'm quite interested to know how long they actually thought about it. So that is our HSS Sandwich, or however you pronounce it. Sorry if I mispronounced it. And DENE'S. So if we start with DENE'S, his 1st generation is where the cube is created. So, yeah. He says that the final part of this generation could really be the 1982 World Champs, and there were maybe 3 methods being used quite commonly, so that was CFOP, Petrus, and corners first. So those were quite commonly used. Waterman was also developed about this time, and, well, there seems to be a handful of cubers who really want to push Waterman nowadays, so I just thought that was worth mentioning. The second one, he says, well, it's quite dead. Again, the cubing Dark Ages, same little motif. Not much happens. It's dead, really. Nothing happens, not much communication. A few emails there and then. Maybe more of an interesting concept for mathematicians, group theorists. All of those different things. And then the third one is the resurrection of cubing. So this is where the Yahoo group was formed. The WCA was formed. Cubing starts growing. It becomes, well, it's still underground. It's still quite hipster, I suppose you could say. But there are lots more competitions, and there are lots more people, essentially, doing cubing competitions. So then the 4th generation, so speedsolving.com, the place where I posted the thread, really overturns Yahoo, and you have Eric and Matthias, who really dominated a lot of different events. So the comps were getting bigger, there were more competitors. VCube Big Cubes are released, and they're actually quite good now, but maybe still, by today's standards, not very good. One very specific cube that was quite revolutionary was the Guhong being released, and the WCA had to redo the regulations, to compensate for all of these cubers, all these new cubers. And then the 5th, the post-resurrection boom, so this is the second really big growth, which is the era we're in now, where the regulations again had to be overhauled because there were so many different cubers and all of that, and the WCA board had to change again, so only von van Brunshem remains, and there was more media coverage. Felix dominates. One little addendum, I would say that we might actually be coming out of this generation as he describes it, because Felix is going down. Well, I wouldn't say going down. He is less dominant than he was before, and again, specialised cubers appear to be overtaking him in a few different events, so we could be going into a 6th generation again, where specialised cubers dominate specialised events, and you can't specifically single out one cube as brilliant in every single event. And the last and most detailed model is that of Harry Savage. So he, again, first two generations, as the last few models, all in common. The first one, where Rubik's dominates, the consumer boom, last hurrah was the World Champs 1982, ALGs were hand-dominated, ALGs that were generated by hands were dominant, and all of that different things. Lots of different methods, people still quite slow, I guess, but yeah, cubing was cool. So, second generation, Dark Ages. Pop culture forgot it, probably the lowest popularity since cubing was established. However, many of the basic concepts for modern methods, such as Roux and ZZ, were formed, but weren't wholly developed, and the hardware, well, still Rubik's, some V-cubes, lots more modding, all of that stuff. Third is the 2003 to 2008, the Revival generation, where the WCA was formed and quickly became the official people. The times started to decrease quite quickly at this time, so you had the times established by, say, Min Tai and all of that back in 1980s, and they were still very much the fastest times up until the Revival, where the time started to decrease once again. CFOP becomes more popular. There are lots of more little tricks and stuff that are being developed and things like that. Roux was conceived, but it wasn't used until much later, though notably Giles Roux was still pretty fast with this method. It could also be argued that Roux was conceived because the better cubes allowed M-slices and things like that to become much more viable. And there were better cubes than there were before, but you still needed modding to get to the highest levels, in this case. Then there was the fourth generation, which he refers to as the New Cubers, from 2009 to 2012, where Felix appears on the scene and really starts pushing all the records down. Well, pretty much all the records down, at least for sighted cubes, but not feet. Comps really get much bigger again. The regs have to change to accommodate. Roux and ZZ gain lots and lots of popularity. Well, I say lots and lots. They gain much more popularity than they ever have before, and really, they start a trend going on today where lots of people try to overturn CFOP as the best method, or at least the most popularly used method. And this was also where ALG started to be optimized with computers, all of that. So Cube Explorer, all of those used to optimize ALG so that they could not just be short, but also be very ergonomic so that they could be executed very, very quickly. Diane enters as well, which means that less modding is needed again because, well, they introduced lots of cubes which were much, much better. Of course, they were nowhere near today's standards, but compared to the cubes that were before, they were so, so much better. And Sheng Shao is around as well, but lots of their cubes were very good for modding, but they weren't specifically good as cubes until after you modded them. They were reasonable, they were better than before, but many mods were still needed, like Florian mods, all Kongster mods, all of that sort of thing. And that leads us now to the fifth generation, where Felix starts to lose records to the more specialised. So he's good at, say, 3x3 and big cubes more than anything else now. There's still lots of growth. The methods, there's still quite a lot of diversity in these methods. And Roux and ZZ are widely acknowledged to be at least as good as CFOP. Or at least they can compete with CFOP thanks to cubers such as, say, Alex Lau, things like that, Kian. And there's lots of different exploring, so you get lots of weird methods like, I don't know, highs, ones that I proposed, like SSC and stuff. All those really weird different ones. And there seems to be a shift towards much more abstract concepts, because all of the obvious in quotes, low-hanging fruit has already been seized, like all the block building and things like that. And Mayu overtakes Diane, small improvements in hardware. Yeah, there really was less improvement in the hardware this generation, though magnets, quite interesting, all of that stuff. Corner cutting becomes much better, 3x3, again, down to personal preference, all of that stuff. So, yeah. One other interesting point that came from the method was ALPHASHEEP, and he pointed out that these generations would likely vary by region. So he gives the example for Africa. There was the first generation where there was the cubing craze, 1981, all of that stuff. But his second generation actually lasts much, much longer, all the way from the end of the consumer boom through the second and third generations, which other cubists described, up until about 2010, where there was the revival and the explosion where other very fast cubers came to Africa and started popularizing it. So, yeah, I suppose all of this, the others are just a general overview, but he does make a very interesting point that different regions would vary, as, well, the world isn't the same. I mean, it's getting closer and closer to the same, but still not there yet. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I quite enjoyed this thread. It's certainly more interesting than quite a few other threads. And yeah, thanks to everyone who posted and everyone who contributed all of their different ideas, models, debates, and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I guess that's it for today. See you guys later. Just as a side note, I'll probably upload the next tutorial next week. And who knows what else. A few more things before then. So, see you guys later.